They say the most dangerous place in the world is between a desperate person and their breaking point. But on Flight 903 to Zurich, that breaking point was sharp, silver, and aimed directly at the jugular. When Serafina, a veteran flight attendant, decided to plunge a Mont Blanc pen into the neck of the quiet man in seat 2A, she thought she was teaching an arrogant passenger a lesson. She thought he was alone. She thought she would get away with it. She was wrong. She didn't just attack a CEO, she attacked a man whose shadow had shadows, and by the time the wheels touched the tarmac, her life wasn't just over. It was a warning to everyone else. This is the story of the mistake that cost everything. The air inside the first-class cabin of Atlantic Blue, Flight 903, smelled of recirculated ozone and expensive leather, a scent Darian Kincaid had grown accustomed to over the last decade. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric settling against his skin. He was tired. It wasn't the physical exhaustion of a workout, but the bone-deep weariness that comes from closing a $4 billion merger while fighting off a hostile takeover from a rival conglomerate in Silicon Valley. Darian was 42, a black man of imposing stature, 6'3", with shoulders that filled the doorframe, but his demeanor was practiced silence. He had learned long ago that in the boardrooms of New York and London, his silence unnerved people more than his voice. He sat in seat 2A, a window seat that offered a view of the tarmac at JFK, rain streaking the glass like tears. He wasn't traveling alone, though to the untrained eye, it certainly looked that way. The cabin was sparsely populated. In 1A sat a young woman with neon blue headphones, chewing gum and scrolling through a tablet. In 1D, a slumped, older man in a fishing vest snored softly before the plane had even pushed back. Across the aisle from Darian, in 2D, was a man reading a German architectural magazine, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. To Serafina Miller, the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin, this just looked like a Tuesday. Serafina was 38, a blonde woman with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her uniform was impeccable, the navy blue skirt suit pressed to a razor's edge, her scarf tied in a perfect knot. But beneath the layers of foundation and hairspray, Serafina was fraying. Her life on the ground was a catastrophe, a pending divorce, a mountain of credit card debt from a failed boutique business, and a recent reprimand from the airline for attitude issues. She hated this route. She hated the entitlement of the passengers. But most of all, she hated the man in 2A. She had watched Darian board. He hadn't made eye contact. He had simply handed over his jacket and asked for a sparkling water with a twist of lime. No. Please? No, thank you. Just a quiet command. To anyone else, it was efficiency. To Serafina, whose nerves were already stripped raw, it felt like a dismissal. It felt like he was looking through her. "Here is your water," Serafina said, placing the crystal glass on his tray table with a little more force than necessary. The water sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Darian didn't flinch. He didn't look up from his phone. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice a low baritone. Serafina stood there for a beat too long. She was waiting for him to apologize for making her wait, or perhaps acknowledge her presence. When he didn't, a small, hot coal of resentment ignited in her chest. She walked back to the galley, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor. "Rich prick," she muttered under her breath as she yanked the curtain closed. In the galley, her colleague, a younger man named Ben, looked up from the coffee maker. "Rough start." "Guy in 2A," Serafina snapped, grabbing a bottle of champagne to prep for takeoff. "Acts like he owns the plane. Doesn't even look at you when he speaks. I swear, these tech guys are the worst. New money, no manners." Ben shrugged. He looks familiar, though. Isn't that the guy from the cover of Forbes last month? The AI infrastructure guy. I don't care if he's the King of England, Serafina hissed, her grip tightening on the bottleneck. He treats me like a servant. He's going to get treated like a problem. Back in the cabin, the man in the fishing vest in seat 1D opened one eye. He shifted slightly, tapping his ear. He wasn't sleeping. He was listening to the galley feed through a microscopic earpiece. "Principal is secure," the man in 1D whispered, his lips barely moving. "Staff is agitated. Watch the lead attendant. She's volatile." Across the aisle, the man reading the architectural magazine in 2D turned a page. He gave a subtle nod. This was Caleb Vance. No, not Vance. Caleb Ross, head of Darian Kincaid's private protection detail. Darian didn't travel with bodyguards who looked like bodyguards. He traveled with ghosts. The young girl in 1A? That was Maya, an ex-Mossad intelligence officer who could disable a threat with a rolled-up magazine. The fisherman? Big Silas, a former Navy SEAL who looked like a grandfather but moved like a viper. Darian Kincaid wasn't just a CEO. He was currently the holder of encryption keys for the next generation of banking security protocols. There was a price on his head, and he knew it. But he didn't know the threat today wouldn't come from a corporate assassin or a hijacker. It would come from the woman pouring his champagne. The seatbelt sign pinged off as Flight 903 leveled out at 35,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm amber hue, designed to lull the wealthy into a false sense of domestic comfort. Darian opened his laptop. He had 3 hours of work to finish before he could attempt to sleep. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his pen, a limited edition Mont Blanc, heavy black resin with platinum inlays. It was a gift from his late father. He set it down next to his glass. Serafina re-entered the cabin. She had been stewing in the galley for 40 minutes. She had taken 2 painkillers for a migraine that was throbbing behind her left eye. But they weren't working. Every time she looked at Darian, she projected her life's failures onto him. He represented everything she didn't have: security, wealth, control. And there was something else. Something uglier buried deep in Serafina's psyche. She had grown up in a town where people like Darian didn't wear suits like that. They didn't sit in first class. They worked for the people in first class. Seeing him there, so unbothered, so powerful, triggered a latent, toxic prejudice she usually kept well hidden under her customer service smile. She approached his seat. "Dinner service, sir?" Darian was typing. "Not yet. Give me an hour." It was a reasonable request, but Serafina heard defiance. "The kitchen closes in 40 minutes, she lied. "If you don't order now, you get cold plates." Darian stopped typing. He slowly turned his head to look at her. For the first time, she saw his eyes. They were cold, analytical. He knew she was lying. He flew this airline 3 times a month. The kitchen in first class didn't close. "I'll take the cold plate then," Darian said evenly. "Thank you." He turned back to his screen. Serafina felt her face flush. He was dismissing her again. She felt small. She felt humiliated. Why? Because he wouldn't play by her arbitrary rules? She reached out to grab his empty water glass, but her hand was shaking. She knocked the glass over. Ice water spilled across the tray table, soaking the edge of Darian's sleeve and splashing onto his open laptop. "Damn it," Darian said, recoiling. He grabbed a napkin, dabbing at the keyboard. "Careful." It was an accident, mostly, but Serafina didn't apologize. Instead, she froze. In her warped mind, he had caused this. If he had just ordered dinner, she wouldn't have been reaching over. "Maybe if you were paying attention, instead of staring at that screen," Serafina snapped. The veneer was cracking. The cabin went silent. Maya in 1A lowered her headphones. Silas in 1D sat up straight. Caleb in 2D closed his magazine. Darian looked up, disbelief etching his features. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Serafina said, her voice rising. "You come on here, thinking you're better than everyone. You think because you have a fancy suit you can treat people like dirt?" "I haven't said 10 words to you," Darian said, his voice calm but hard. "I would like to speak to the purser." "I am the purser for this cabin," Serafina yelled. The stress of the divorce, the debt, the migraine, it all coalesced into a singular hatred for this man. "And I am telling you to calm down." "I am calm," Darian said, standing up. He was tall, looming over her. He did it instinctively to shake off the water, but Serafina took it as aggression. "Sit down," she shrieked. "Sit down or I'll have you restrained." "Serafina, stop." Ben, the other flight attendant, rushed in from the galley. He looked terrified. "Sir, I am so sorry. She's not feeling well." "She just spilled water on a $10,000 laptop and is screaming at me," Darian said, brushing the water off his suit. "Get her out of this cabin. Now." "Don't you tell me what to do." Serafina lunged forward. It happened in slow motion. Serafina's eyes darted to the tray table. She saw the Mont Blanc pen. The platinum glinted in the cabin light. In her mind, she wasn't a flight attendant anymore. She was a victim fighting back against an oppressor. It was a psychotic break, a moment where reality fractured. She grabbed the pen. "Back off!" she screamed. Darian raised his hands, palms open. "Hey, easy!" She didn't wait. With a guttural scream, she swung her arm in a vicious arc. She didn't aim for the chest or the arm. She went for the neck. The tip of the heavy fountain pen slammed into the soft tissue just above Darian's collarbone, missing the carotid artery by millimeters but puncturing the jugular vein. Blood, dark and arterial, sprayed across the white leather of seat 2A. Darian gasped, his hand flying to his neck. He stumbled back, crashing into the aisle. Serafina stood there, the bloody pen in her hand, panting. Her eyes were wide, manic. "I told you to sit down." She raised the pen again, but she never brought it down, because the fisherman in 1D was already moving, and he wasn't moving like an old man anymore. Serafina Miller had raised the Mont Blanc pen for a second strike, her eyes wide with a manic, terrifying focus. In her mind, the first blow hadn't been enough. The rich prick was still moving. The adrenaline flooding her system had distorted her perception of time. She felt powerful, righteous, untouchable. She was the authority at 35,000 feet, but her reign ended in exactly 0.8 seconds. Silas, the older man in the fishing vest from seat 1D, didn't stand up. He didn't shout. He exploded from his seat with a velocity that defied physics for a man of his apparent age. He didn't tackle her. That was amateur hour. He dismantled her. As Serafina brought her arm down, Silas stepped inside her guard. His left hand shot up, catching her wrist in a vice-like grip that stopped the downward arc instantly. The bone in her forearm audibly cracked under the pressure of his grip. Serafina screamed, a high, shrill sound of shock and pain, dropping the bloody pen. Before the pen even hit the carpet, Silas had twisted her arm behind her back, driving her face first into the bulkhead wall. Thud. The impact knocked the wind out of her. "Subject neutral," Silas barked, his voice no longer the rasp of a sleepy fisherman, but the command of a Tier 1 operator. At the exact same moment, the cabin transformed into a synchronized war room. Maya, the young girl in 1A with the blue headphones, had vaulted over her seat. She didn't look at Darian or Serafina. Her job was perimeter. She landed softly in the aisle, spinning to face the economy curtain. She ripped the headphones off her neck, revealing a coiled acoustic tube earpiece. "Ben!" Maya shouted at the terrified flight attendant in the galley. "Lock the cockpit door. Do not let anyone in or out. Move!" Ben, paralyzed by the spray of blood on the white leather, blinked. What? Maya didn't repeat herself. She lunged forward, grabbed Ben by his vest, and shoved him toward the cockpit. "Lock the door, now!" Ben scrambled, fumbling with the keypad, his hands shaking violently. Meanwhile, Caleb Ross, the architect in 2D, was already on his knees beside Darian. Darian was slumped against the sidewall, his hand clamped over his neck. Blood was pulsing between his fingers, dark and thick. "Darian, look at me," Caleb said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He wasn't looking at the magazine anymore. He was ripping open a Velcro pouch that had been Velcroed to the inside of his suit jacket. "Silas, status?" "Target secured," Silas growled. He had Serafina pinned against the floor now, his knee buried in the small of her back. He pulled a pair of plastic flex cuffs from his belt, items that definitely weren't standard passenger carry-on, and zipped them tight around Serafina's wrists. "Get off me!" Serafina shrieked, her face pressed into the carpet. "He attacked me! I am the lead flight attendant! You can't do this! That man is dangerous!" Silas leaned down, his mouth inches from her ear. "You have the right to remain silent," he whispered, cold as ice. "I suggest you use it before I gag you." "Who are you?" Serafina sobbed, the pain in her arm radiating up her shoulder. "You're just a fisherman. Let me up." Silas ignored her. He looked up at Caleb. "How is he?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He had peeled Darian's hand away from the neck. The wound was a jagged puncture, directly over the jugular. It was bleeding profusely, but the carotid artery seemed intact. "Venous bleed," Caleb announced, pulling a pack of combat gauze, impregnated with a hemostatic agent to clot blood instantly, from his kit. "I need pressure. Maya, get the med kit from the overhead bin. The big one. Now!" Darian was pale, his eyes fluttering. The shock was setting in. "Caleb," he rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. Did I get the contract?" "Focus on breathing, boss," Caleb said, pressing the gauze deep into the wound. Darian groaned, his back arching in pain. "Stay with me. Don't you dare close your eyes." The cabin, once a sanctuary of luxury, now looked like a crime scene. The smell of copper and expensive cologne hung heavy in the air. Serafina was hauled to her feet by Silas. She was hyperventilating. Her world had collapsed so quickly, she couldn't process the geometry of it. "You're making a mistake," she stammered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "He started it. He was aggressive. I was defending the aircraft." Silas shoved her into seat 1D, his seat. He buckled her in tight. "If you say one more word," Silas said, staring into her soul, "I will tape your mouth shut. Do you understand?" Serafina looked at him. Really looked at him. This wasn't a passenger. The way he stood, the way he scanned the cabin, the earpiece he was now adjusting. She looked at the girl in 1A who was tearing open a heavy medical kit with practiced efficiency. She looked at the architect who was treating the wound with the skill of a combat medic. A cold dread, colder than the ice water she had spilled, washed over her. "They aren't passengers." Who is he?" Serafina whispered, her voice trembling. She looked at Darian, who was now lying in the aisle, Caleb elevating his legs onto the seat to keep blood flowing to his heart. Maya walked past Serafina, stopping for a split second. She looked down at the flight attendant with a look of pure disgust. "He's the man who just bought the airline you work for," Maya lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Darian bought companies for breakfast, And we are the people paid to make sure he survives the flight. You didn't just assault a passenger, lady. You attempted to assassinate a high-value principal. Serafina's stomach dropped. Assassinate? The word felt too big, too heavy. No, it was a pen. Pilot is on the line, Ben shouted from the galley phone, his face pale as a sheet. Captain Anderson wants to know what the hell is going on. He sees the commotion on the cockpit cam. Caleb looked up, his hands slick with Darian's blood. Maya, take the comms. Tell Anderson we have a code red medical. Mass hemorrhage. We need an immediate diversion to the nearest trauma center. Tell him to squawk 79700. Where are we? Maya asked, moving to the phone. Over the Atlantic. Silas checked his watch, which was actually a tactical GPS unit. 3 hours out of New York. We're closer to Gander, Newfoundland. Tell him to put it down in Gander. Maya grabbed the phone. Captain, this is Special Agent Maya Lynn, private security detail for Mr. Kincaid. We have a confirmed stabbing in the first-class cabin. Perpetrator is neutralized and in custody. The principal has a severed jugular. We need wheels down in 20 minutes or he dies. There was a pause on the other end. Then the plane banked sharply to the left. The engines roared as the throttle was pushed to the limit. The nose dipped. They were descending. Darian coughed, his eyes rolling back. Cold, he whispered. I know, Darian, Caleb said, pressing harder on the neck. I know. Stay with me. Serafina sat in seat 1D, watching the life drain out of the man she had hated for no reason. The reality of the karma was hitting her in waves. She had thought he was an arrogant nobody. She had thought she was the one with the power. Now she was handcuffed to a seat, watching a team of elite bodyguards fight to save the life she had tried to take. She looked at her uniform, stained with a speck of his blood. I didn't know, she whimpered to herself. I didn't know. Silas stood over her, his shadow long. Ignorance isn't a defense, Serafina, he said quietly. You let your ego hold the weapon. Now you're going to watch what happens when you break the one rule of the sky. What rule? She asked, her voice barely audible. You never judge a book by its cover, Silas said, especially when that book can rewrite your entire existence. The plane shook as they hit turbulence, dropping through the cloud layer. The cabin lights flickered. Darian's breathing was becoming shallow. We're losing pressure, Caleb shouted. I can't stop the bleeding with just gauze. I need to clamp it. Maya, get me the hemostats. Serafina squeezed her eyes shut. She prayed for the first time in years. Not for herself, but for the man on the floor. Because she realized now that if he died, her life wasn't just over. It would be a living hell. But karma, as Serafina was about to learn, doesn't listen to prayers. It only listens to actions. And her actions had just signed a warrant that no lawyer on earth could vacate. The intercom crackled. This is the captain. Cabin crew, prepare for emergency landing. We are coming in hot into Gander. Brace for impact. The landing at Gander International Airport was not graceful. It was a controlled crash. The Boeing 787 slammed onto the runway, the tires screaming in protest as the reverse thrusters roared, shaking the entire airframe. The force of the deceleration threw Serafina forward against her restraints, the seatbelt digging into her chest. In the aisle, Caleb and Maya braced Darian's body. They had wrapped him in the airline's cashmere blankets to combat the shock, but the crimson stain was spreading alarmingly fast. Almost there, boss, Caleb gritted out, his own arms trembling from the exertion of maintaining pressure on the wound for 20 minutes. Stay with us. As the plane skidded to a halt on a remote section of the tarmac, the cabin was suddenly bathed in the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles waiting outside. The silence that followed the engine shutdown was deafening, broken only by the hiss of the hydraulic door opening. Freezing Newfoundland air rushed into the cabin, biting and sharp. It smelled of snow and jet fuel. Paramedics stormed the plane first, a blur of neon yellow and green. Male 42, penetrating trauma to the neck, suspected jugular involvement, hypovolemic shock. Caleb rattled off the stats with medical precision, stepping back to let the EMTs work. He watched them intubate Darian right there on the floor, his face an impassive mask, but his knuckles were white. As they loaded Darian onto a stretcher and rushed him out, Serafina felt a surge of irrational hope. Maybe, now that he was gone, she could explain. Maybe she could talk to the pilots, to her colleagues. "Ben!" she called out to the junior attendant who was cowering in the galley. "Ben, tell them he was aggressive." Ben slowly peeked around the corner. He looked at Serafina, then at the blood-soaked carpet, then at the formidable figure of Silas standing guard over her. Ben's voice shook. "I saw you grab the pen, Serafina. He was just standing there." Serafina's face crumbled. "You're lying. You're working with them." 2 officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, boarded the plane. They were big men in heavy parkas, their expressions grim. Silas stepped forward, flashing a badge that Serafina couldn't quite see, a private security credential that carried weight internationally. "Subject is in 1D, Silas said, pointing a finger at Serafina. "Assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, interference with flight crew. She is restrained." The officers marched over. They didn't ask her side of the story. They didn't ask if she was okay. One of them pulled a knife and cut the flex cuffs Silas had used, immediately replacing them with cold, heavy steel handcuffs. "Serafina Miller," the officer recited, hauling her up. "You are under arrest." "My arm!" Serafina screamed as he pulled her fractured forearm behind her back. "It's broken. He broke it." "You can discuss your medical needs at the station," the officer said flatly. "Move." They dragged her off the plane. The wind outside whipped her hair across her face. She saw the ambulance speeding away, lights flashing, carrying the man she had tried to humble, the man whose life hung in the balance because of her temper. She was shoved into the back of a cruiser. As the door slammed shut, sealing her in the cage, she saw Maya standing on the tarmac, talking to a man in a trench coat, likely a federal agent. Maya handed him a small SD card. Serafina's blood ran cold. The cabin cameras. Atlantic Blue's newer jets had high-definition security cameras in the first-class cabin for liability purposes. She had forgotten. In her rage, she had forgotten everything. 3 days later. The interview room at the RCMP detachment in Gander was painted a depressing shade of beige. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Serafina sat at a metal table, her arm in a heavy plaster cast, her uniform wrinkled and stained. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pen entering his neck. She saw the spray of blood. The door opened. It wasn't the police officer this time. It was a woman in a sharp grey suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked expensive. She looked like a shark. "Ms. Miller," the woman said, sitting down. She didn't offer a hand. "My name is Evelyn Cross. I represent Atlantic Blue Airlines." Serafina exhaled, a sob escaping her throat. "Oh, thank God. Evelyn, you have to help me. These people, they're saying crazy things. I need the union rep. I need a lawyer." Evelyn opened her briefcase and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "I am not here to represent you, Serafina. I am here to serve you with your termination notice." Serafina blinked. "What? You can't. I have tenure. It was an unruly passenger incident." "No," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of warmth. It was a felonious assault on Darian Kincaid. Do you know who Darian Kincaid is, Serafina? He's just some tech guy, Serafina spat, the old defensive anger flaring up. He thought he was better than everyone. Evelyn leaned forward, interlacing her fingers. Darian Kincaid is the CEO of Kincaid Ross Dynamics. He is a defense contractor. He advises the Pentagon on cybersecurity. Last week, he signed a deal to acquire a majority stake in the holding company that owns Atlantic Blue Airlines. The room seemed to tilt. Serafina gripped the edge of the table with her good hand. He owns the airline? As of Tuesday morning, yes, Evelyn said. You didn't just stab a passenger. You stabbed your boss's boss's boss. You stabbed the owner. Serafina felt like she was going to be sick. Furthermore, Evelyn continued, enjoying the destruction, the airline is disavowing your actions completely. The union has reviewed the footage. They are withdrawing support. You violated 17 safety protocols and committed a violent felony. You are on your own. But the footage, Serafina stammered. It shows he was yelling. He stood up. Evelyn pulled a tablet from her bag and slid it across the table. Watch. Serafina looked down. The video was crystal clear. It showed Darian sitting quietly. It showed Serafina knocking the water over. It showed her screaming at him while he looked confused. It showed him standing up to dry his pants. And then it showed Serafina, face twisted in a mask of pure hate, lunging with the pen. It didn't look like defense. It looked like a slaughter. This video leaked an hour ago, Evelyn said. It has 40 million views on Twitter. The hashtag Flight 903 is trending worldwide. You are the most hated woman in America right now, Serafina. Serafina stared at the screen. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. Lock her up. Psycho. Imagine working your whole life to be that successful and getting stabbed by a Karen with a pen. Mr. Kincaid survived the surgery, Evelyn added, delivering the final blow. He is in stable condition, and his legal team, not us, his private team, is pressing for the maximum charges. In Canada, that's aggravated assault and attempted murder. Then, you'll be extradited to the US to face federal charges for interfering with a flight crew. You're looking at 20 years, Serafina. Minimum. Serafina put her head in her hands. The tears finally came, hot and hopeless. It wasn't unfairness. It wasn't bad luck. It was the crushing weight of reality. She had let her bitterness, her jealousy, and her bias drive the car, and she had driven it right off a cliff. I just wanted him to sit down, she whispered, her voice broken. I just wanted him to respect me. Evelyn stood up, clicking her briefcase shut. Respect isn't demanded, Serafina. It's earned. And you just spent your entire life's earnings in 2 seconds. Evelyn walked to the door and knocked for the guard. As the heavy steel door buzzed open, she looked back one last time. Oh, and Serafina. That Montblanc pen. It was a gift from his father. He wants it back. They're entering it into evidence. But he made sure to tell the DA. He wants the pen back when you're in prison. The door slammed shut. Serafina was left alone in the beige room, the silence louder than the roar of the engines. She looked at her reflection in the darkened mirror on the wall. She didn't see a victim. She saw a woman who had destroyed herself because she couldn't handle someone else's shine. The karma hadn't just hit back. It had decapitated her life. Outside the station, the press vans were lining up. The world was waiting for the monster of Flight 903. And Darian Kincaid, recovering in a VIP suite at St. John's General Hospital, was already back on his laptop, closing the deal, the scar on his neck a permanent reminder that success always paints a target on your back. The United States District Court, Southern District of New York. The silence in courtroom 12B was not empty. It was heavy, pressing down on the lungs of everyone present like a physical weight. It was the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. Outside the heavy oak doors, a media circus had encamped on the steps of the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse. Cameras from CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera were jostling for position. Satellite trucks blocked traffic on Pearl Street, and a crowd of protesters stood behind barricades holding signs. Some signs read, "Justice for Flight 903, while others, darker and more cynical, read, "Eat the rich." Inside, the air was recycled and cold, smelling of floor wax and nervous sweat. Serafina Miller sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles had turned the color of old bone. She looked nothing like the polished, authoritative flight attendant who had commanded the cabin of Flight 903 6 months ago. The Federal Detention Center in Brooklyn had stripped her of her vanity. Her blonde hair, once dyed to a perfect honey hue, was now limp and streaked with aggressive grey roots. Her skin was sallow, deprived of sunlight. She wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that bunched unflatteringly at the waist, and her ankles were shackled to the bolt in the floor. She stared at the wood grain of the table, counting the scratches. She couldn't look up. If she looked up, she would have to see the gallery. She would have to see the sketch artists furiously drawing her profile. She would have to see the empty seats where her husband and sister should have been. Her husband, Rick, had filed the divorce papers 3 days after her extradition from Canada. He hadn't even visited. He sent a process server. That was the first wave of karma, the realization that her entire support system was conditional, based on her being normal, employed, and sane. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, startling Serafina so bad she nearly knocked over her water pitcher. Judge Arlene Rostova entered the courtroom. Rostova was a legend in the Southern District, a woman of steel and wire, known for sentences that didn't just punish the crime, but dismantled the criminal's soul. She didn't look at Serafina. She arranged her robes, sat down, and peered over her reading glasses at the packed room. "Be seated," Rostova said. The sound of 200 people sitting simultaneously was like a wave crashing. "We are here for the sentencing phase in United States v. Serafina Miller," the judge continued, her voice dry and precise. "The jury has returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: assault with a dangerous weapon within the special aircraft jurisdiction of the United States, and interference with flight crew members and attendants. The defense has filed a motion for leniency. The prosecution has filed a motion for maximum sentencing enhancement due to the status of the victim and the extreme nature of the violence." Serafina's public defender, a beleaguered man named Mr. Gorski, who smelled of stale tobacco and defeat, leaned over. "Stand up, Serafina, and for God's sake, look remorseful." Serafina stood. Her legs felt like water. She risked a glance across the aisle. The prosecution table was a fortress of expensive wool and confidence. And there he was, Darian Kincaid. He sat in the center, flanked by the assistant U.S. attorney and his own private counsel. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a monument. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him with architectural precision. His posture was upright, relaxed but alert. He wasn't looking at the judge, he was looking at a file in front of him. But the most terrifying thing about Darian wasn't his suit or his stillness. It was the scar. Even from 20 feet away, Serafina could see it, a thick, raised, jagged keloid line that started just below his jawline and tore diagonally down toward his collarbone. It was an angry purple rope against his dark skin. It was a brand, a signature, her signature. Behind Darian, in the first row of the gallery, sat his team. Caleb Ross, the man Serafina had thought was an architect, sat with his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room for threats that didn't exist. Next to him was Maya Lin, the girl with the headphones, looking sharp and lethal in a blazer. They weren't just employees, they were the Praetorian Guard, and they were staring at Serafina with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Does the government wish to present a statement before sentencing?" Judge Rostova asked. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Weiss, stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Kincaid would like to address the court." A murmur ran through the gallery. It was rare for billionaires like Kincaid to speak directly. Usually, they let their lawyers do the talking while they waited in the limousine. Darian stood. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, a slow, deliberate movement. He walked to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. The room went so silent you could hear the hum of the hard drives in the court stenographer's machine. "Your Honor," Darian began. His voice was a rich baritone, calm and measured, filling the high-ceilinged room without effort. "6 months ago, I boarded a flight to Zurich to close a deal that would secure the jobs of 12,000 people. I sat in seat 2A. I asked for water. I opened my laptop." He paused, letting the simplicity of the scene settle. "I did not speak to Ms. Miller aggressively. I did not insult her. I did not touch her. The cockpit voice recorder and the cabin video confirmed this. Yet Ms. Miller decided that my presence in her cabin was an offense. She decided that my request for silence was an act of oppression." Darian turned his head. He looked directly at Serafina. It wasn't a glare, it was worse. It was a look of profound, analytical disappointment. It was the way a scientist looks at a failed experiment. "There is a narrative that has been spun by Ms. Miller's defense," Darian continued, never breaking eye contact with Serafina. "They say she was under stress. They say she was going through a divorce. They say she snapped. They want you to believe this was a momentary lapse in judgment." He gripped the sides of the podium. "But you don't stab a man in the neck because of stress. You scream. You quit. You cry in the galley. You do not pick up a heavy metal fountain pen, aim for the jugular vein, and strike with enough force to sever muscle tissue. That is not stress. That is hatred." Serafina flinched. Tears were streaming down her face, hot and humiliating. She wanted to scream, "That's not true!" But her throat was closed tight. "I am a black man in America who has achieved a certain level of success," Darian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more intimate, more dangerous. "I am used to the looks. I am used to being followed in stores. I am used to people assuming I am the bodyguard, not the CEO. But on that plane, Ms. Miller didn't just assume. She acted on a deep-seated, toxic belief that I did not belong there, that I was new money, that I needed to be taught a lesson in humility." He pointed a finger at his scar. "She missed my carotid artery by 4 millimeters. 4 millimeters. That is the width of a grain of rice. If my head of security, Mr. Ross, had been sitting in row 3 instead of row 2, if he had been 1 second slower, I would have bled out in 3 minutes. My children would be fatherless. My company would have collapsed, and Ms. Miller would be standing here for murder, not assault." Darian leaned in. "I am not asking for vengeance, Your Honor. Vengeance is a weak man's game. I am asking for accountability. I am asking the court to recognize that when you hold a position of trust, when you are responsible for the safety of passengers, and you turn that trust into a weapon because of your own bias, you forfeit your right to freedom. I ask for the maximum sentence." He stepped back. He didn't look at Serafina again. He walked back to his seat, with the grace of a king returning to his throne. Mr. Gorski stood up, shuffling his papers nervously. Your Honor, my client is... She is broken. She has lost everything. Her career, her marriage, her reputation. She is a pariah. A long prison sentence serves no purpose other than cruelty. She is not a danger to society. Judge Rostova took off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at Serafina. Ms. Miller, please stand. Serafina scrambled to her feet, the chains clinking loudly. I have watched the video of the incident 40 times, Judge Rostova said. Do you know what strikes me the most? It isn't the stabbing. Serafina blinked, confused. Your Honor, it's the look on your face after, Rostova said, her voice like ice. You didn't look horrified. You didn't try to help him. You stood over him with the pen in your hand, and you screamed at him to sit down. You were angry that he was bleeding on your floor. You were angry that he was dying inconveniently. The judge leaned forward. That is not a lapse in judgment. That is a defect of character. You viewed Mr. Kincaid not as a human being, but as a problem to be managed. And when he didn't manage easily, you tried to erase him. Rostova picked up her gavel. It looked heavy. The federal sentencing guidelines suggest a range of 15 to 20 years for these offenses. However, due to the vulnerability of the victim in a confined aircraft and the use of a deadly weapon by a crew member, I am applying the enhancement. Serafina's breath hitched. Enhancement? Serafina Miller, for the charge of interference with flight crew members, I sentence you to 20 years. For the charge of assault with a dangerous weapon, I sentence you to 10 years. The courtroom gasped. Serafina's knees buckled. She grabbed the table. 30 years. She was 38. She would be 68. Her life was over. These sentences, Rostova said, hammering the final nail, shall run consecutively, not concurrently. You will serve the full 30 years. There will be no possibility of parole in the federal system. Bang! The gavel strike sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. No! Serafina shrieked. It was a primal, animal sound. No, please. Judge, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. Darian, please tell them. She turned toward him, her hands reaching out, but the chains caught her short. Darian didn't turn around. He didn't flinch. He was already standing up, buttoning his coat, shaking hands with the prosecutor. He was moving on. He was leaving her in the past, exactly where she belonged. 2 U.S. Marshals, big men with stone faces, grabbed Serafina by the elbows. Let's go, Miller, one of them grunted. I have a son! Serafina screamed as they dragged her backward toward the holding cell door. I have a life! You can't do this! But they could, and they did. The heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The last thing she saw was the back of Darian Kincaid's head as he walked out into the sunlight. 4 months later, Federal Correctional Institution, Aliceville, Alabama. The laundry room of FCI Aliceville was a humid, deafening hellscape. Giant industrial dryers roared 24 hours a day, spinning the grey uniforms of 1,500 inmates. The air smelled of cheap chemical detergent and mold. Serafina Miller stood at Station 4, folding sheets. Her hands, once manicured and soft, were now red, chapped, and covered in small burns from the hot linens. She had lost 20 pounds. Her uniform hung off her like a sack. She kept her head down. In prison, eye contact was a currency she couldn't afford to spend. She was no longer Serafina Miller, the lead flight attendant. She was inmate 89402B. Hey, Miller, a voice barked. It was Big T, a woman serving life for racketeering, who ran the laundry block. "Break time! Turn on the TV! I want to see the news!" Serafina wiped her sweat on her sleeve and walked over to the small, caged television bolted to the concrete wall. She pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, tuned to a 24-hour business news channel. Serafina froze. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Kincaid Dynamics acquires Atlantic Blue, rebrands as Phoenix Air." And there he was, Darian Kincaid. He was standing on a stage in a massive hangar. Behind him sat a brand-new Boeing 787 Dreamliner, painted in a sleek, matte black and gold livery, the colors of his company. He looked powerful. He looked untouchable. The scar on his neck was visible, but he didn't hide it. He wore it like a medal of war. A reporter was sticking a microphone in his face. "Mr. Kincaid," the reporter asked, "some are saying this acquisition is personal. You bought the airline where you were attacked. Is this revenge?" Darian smiled. It was a dazzling, charismatic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Revenge is emotional," Darian said smoothly. "Business is logical. Atlantic Blue was a failing asset with a toxicity problem in its culture. We bought it to fix it. We are implementing new training, new security protocols, and a new philosophy. Every passenger is a guest, and every employee is a guardian." The camera panned to a glass display case standing next to the podium. Inside, resting on a velvet pillow, was a pen. The Mont Blanc. The pen. Serafina felt like she had been punched in the gut. He had kept it. "We are also auctioning off this item today," Darian continued. "This pen represents a moment of darkness, but today we turn it into light. The winning bid is currently $350,000. Every cent will go to a fund I've established to provide mental health support for service industry workers." The inmates in the laundry room laughed. "Damn," Big T chuckled, shaking her head. "That brother is cold. He took the weapon you tried to kill him with and sold it for a house. That is some boss-level moves right there." Another inmate, a young girl named Hernandez, looked at Serafina with a sneer. "Hey Miller, ain't that your pen? You made him rich, girl. You made him famous." Serafina couldn't breathe. The irony was suffocating. She had tried to humiliate him. She had tried to show him he was beneath her. Instead, she had handed him the keys to the kingdom. Her act of violence had been the catalyst that allowed him to buy her employer, fire her bosses, and rebrand the entire industry in his image. She was rotting in a cage in Alabama, folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. He was on global television, being hailed as a visionary survivor. "Turn it off," Serafina whispered. "What?" Big T asked. "Turn it off," Serafina screamed, grabbing a wet sheet and throwing it at the wall. She slid down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth. The reality finally hit her. It wasn't just the prison sentence. It was the irrelevance. She was a footnote in his biography. She was the villain in his hero's journey. She would rot here for 30 years, and the world would only remember her as the crazy woman who tried to stop Darian Kincaid and failed. The TV continued to blare. The reporter's voice cut through the laundry room noise. And finally, Phoenix Air announces its new slogan, personally chosen by Mr. Kincaid: "Rise above." A fitting motto for a man who refused to stay down. Serafina closed her eyes, but she couldn't shut out the sound of his victory. The karma hadn't just hit back. It had crushed her, ground her into dust, and paved a runway over her remains. And that is the terrifying reality of Flight 903. Serafina Miller thought she was the main character in a story about putting someone in their place. She didn't realize until it was too late that arrogance is a blindfold and rage is a trap you set for yourself. She lost her freedom, her family, and her future, all because she couldn't handle her own bias for 10 seconds. Meanwhile, Darian Kincaid turned a murder attempt into a marketing campaign. It's the ultimate lesson in karma. Sometimes the universe doesn't just punish you, it lets your enemy win and forces you to watch from the sidelines. So what do you think? Was 30 years too harsh for a moment of madness? Or did Serafina get exactly what she deserved for trying to take a life over a dinner order? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. Judge Rostova gave hers, now you give yours. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about when keeping it real goes wrong. Stay safe, stay humble, and remember, you never know who's sitting in seat 2A.